Picture this, April 1942. America is still reeling from the shock of Pearl Harbor. The country feels vulnerable, angry, and desperate to strike back. But Japan seems untouchable. Its homeland sits thousands of miles away behind powerful defenses. Then, someone proposes something so risky it sounds almost insane. Launch bombers from an aircraft carrier, fly them straight into Japan, bomb Tokyo, and escape across enemy territory with almost no fuel. Most military leaders think the plan is impossible. One man smiles and says, "Let's do it."
Hi, quick question. What would you do if your country needed a victory? Not a huge victory, just one bold movement that proves you can hit back.
In early World War II, the United States faced exactly that problem. Morale was low, Japan looked unstoppable, and the American public needed hope. So the US military approved one of the most daring missions in modern history, a surprise air attack on Japan itself, carried out by a small group of volunteers who knew the odds were brutal. This mission would become known as the Doolittle raid, and the story behind it feels less like a military operation and more like a Hollywood movie that somehow happened in real life. Let me walk you through how a handful of pilots changed the psychology of an entire war. After Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the United States entered World War II with anger and determination. But also a serious problem. Japan controlled huge parts of the Pacific, and its homeland was far beyond the range of most American bombers. Attacking Japan directly seemed nearly impossible, but American leaders believed something important. Even a small strike against Tokyo would send a powerful message. It would show Japan that its homeland was not safe, and it would show Americans that the war could be fought back. The challenge was simple to describe but incredibly difficult to solve. How do you send bombers far enough to reach Japan when you have no nearby bases? One Navy officer had a bold thought. What if medium bombers took off from an aircraft carrier? Now that might sound normal today, but in 1942 it was completely unheard of. Aircraft carriers usually launch smaller fighter planes, not large army bombers. The bomber chosen for the mission was the B-25 Mitchell, a twin-engine aircraft that normally needed a long runway. Trying to launch it from the short deck of a carrier was like trying to take off from a floating parking lot. The man chosen to lead the mission was Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle, a brilliant pilot, engineer, and someone who loved challenges that sounded impossible. When Doolittle heard the plan, he did not laugh it off. He leaned in. The crews began intense secret training, practicing extremely short takeoffs on a runway painted to match the size of a carrier deck. They stripped the bombers of unnecessary equipment to make them lighter, even removing defensive guns and adding extra fuel tanks. Every gallon of fuel mattered, because the plan was risky. The bombers would launch from a carrier in the Pacific, fly to Japan, drop their bombs, then continue flying west to friendly territory in China. If everything went perfectly, they might just make it. If things went wrong, they could run out of fuel over the ocean or land in enemy territory. Every volunteer on the mission knew the risks, and every one of them still stepped forward. In April 1940, 16 bombers were loaded onto the aircraft carrier USS Hornet, packed tightly on the flight deck like a row of giant steel birds. The ship sailed across the Pacific with another carrier group protecting it, moving closer and closer to Japan. The goal was to get within launching distance without being discovered. But early on the morning of April 18th, everything changed. A Japanese patrol boat spotted the fleet. Even though the boat was quickly destroyed, the Americans knew it probably had time to send a warning. That meant Japan might already know something was coming. The fleet commander faced a tough choice: launch the bombers early from much farther away, or cancel the mission entirely. Doolittle made the call. Launch now. Imagine standing on the deck of a ship rocking in the ocean, staring at a runway barely longer than a football field. Now imagine trying to launch a heavy bomber from it. One by one, the planes roared down the deck, engines screaming, the nose lifting just before reaching the edge. Each takeoff was a small miracle. 16 bombers lifted into the sky and headed straight toward Japan, flying low to avoid radar detection. Hours later, the crews reached their targets, Tokyo and several other cities. They dropped their bombs on factories, warehouses, and military facilities, causing limited physical damage but enormous psychological shock. For the first time in the war, Japan itself had been attacked. After the bombing, the crews turned toward China. But remember that early launch decision. They had started the mission hundreds of miles farther away than planned. Fuel was running dangerously low. Night fell. Storms rolled in, and one by one the bombers ran out of fuel. Most crews had no choice but to bail out with parachutes or crash land. Several airmen were captured by Japanese forces, and some were tragically executed. But many survived with the help of Chinese civilians who risked their own lives to hide and rescue the American pilots. From a military standpoint, the raid caused relatively small damage, but psychologically it was massive. In the United States, the news exploded across newspapers and radio broadcasts. Americans suddenly had proof that Japan could be struck back. Morale surged almost overnight. In Japan, the effect was the opposite. Leaders were shocked that enemy bombers reached Tokyo, and they became determined to push their defensive perimeter farther out into the Pacific. That decision would help lead to one of the most important battles of the war, the Battle of Midway, where Japan suffered a devastating defeat. So, in a strange twist, a small raid with only 16 bombers helped shape the future of the entire Pacific War. Jimmy Doolittle originally believed the mission had failed because the crews were forced to abandon their aircraft. He expected to be court-martialed when he returned home. Instead, he was awarded the Medal of Honor and promoted, because leaders understood the true impact of the mission. The Doolittle Raiders became legends, symbols of courage, creativity, and the power of bold ideas. Sometimes the most important victories are not measured in damage, but in hope. Outro: the Doolittle Raid reminds us of something powerful. History often turns on moments where people take huge risks with no guarantee of success. 16 crews, a crazy plan, and one desperate mission helped change the momentum of an entire war. Not bad for an idea that once sounded completely impossible. If you enjoy stories like this, the bold missions, forgotten heroes, and wild moments that shaped history, make sure you subscribe to the channel, drop a comment, and tell me which historical event you want to hear next. And if this story surprised you, share it with a friend, because honestly, the Doolittle Raid deserves to be remembered. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next story.